with this conference, we managed to shed some light on the dark times that we are going through, some light hopefully on the way out of this darkness. But Sven, please, you have the final word.
Thank you, Kristi. Thank you all the panelists and speakers, and thank you all for participating, especially the ones who survived until this late hour. And it's always dangerous to have the final word, especially in these difficult times. You know, the idea of this conference came long before the war started in Ukraine, and there was even some thinking going on that maybe we should cancel this, because talking about something else at the moment feels a little bit like this very short joke that is just one sentence. Other than that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? But I'm very grateful to ICDS to have managed very well, actually, to modify the subject, still keeping it, but concentrating very much also on Ukraine. And so therefore, I will also start with the same subject, because doing otherwise, I think, would be like this joke a little bit. You know, we have to understand first, in order to tackle the issue that on hand, to define what it is, what is the problem. And I think we should agree, all of us, that we are witnessing right now a 1939 moment. This is a defining moment for the world, and even the Secretary General of the United Nations has numerous times called it the greatest threat and challenge to the UN Charter in the existence of the organization in almost 77 years. When we think of the situation right now, I think it's quite obvious to me at least, and I hope that to most of us, that this is the beginning of the end of Putin and his regime. But the problem is that so was 1939 for Adolf Hitler. But we all know how long it took and what suffering came with this end. It is not something that is only touching the region, and that is what makes it so different from all the other conflicts that we have seen even as a member of Security Council. It is touching the whole world. And just last week we had a breakfast with Undersecretary General Rosemarie DiCarlo, and she was speaking, and she was saying that there might be a food security issue coming up very soon. I think the problem is, it's not that it might come. I consider this a certainty. It will come. And when you look at Africa, when you look at crisis situations like Yemen and so on, the number of people facing famine is going to increase manifold. We have to stop the evil before the evil stops us. Quite often I'm asked in these days, who might be next? Will Poland be next? Will the Baltic states be next? Will Estonia be next? I think the question itself is wrong, and it means that the people asking this do not understand what kind of a conflict it is, because we are all in it already. There are just different means of resistance. There is a different means of war. But if you listen to the speech that Putin gave on the 21st of February, it was not even so much about Ukraine. And secondly, it was not about re-establishing the Soviet Union. It was recreation of the Russian Empire. And it was targeted towards the so-called, what they call in Russia and Russian television every day now, it's the collective West. And so therefore the question itself is wrong. We are all in this war, and if we understand that it's a defining moment, the greatest danger to the existence of the organization, then we should remember the speech of Winston Churchill in the spring of 1940, where he promised his nation blood, toil, tears, and sweat. And let's be honest, in this war, Ukrainians are the ones who give blood and tears. At the least we should be able to give would be toil and sweat. And we should be ready for that. It was a bit disappointing when the aggression started and when European Union started talking about sanctions, that the first reactions were to try to find the sanctions that will not hurt us. It changed pretty quickly, and now I think there is more of an understanding that, first of all, the war and the economic part that we face, it will hurt us, and it will last a long time. But just like Winston Churchill said, we will and we have to prevail. Now, in this war, I would say that, in my mind, there are three different stages: short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And the short-term clearly is we have to win the war. And we, I mean, mostly Ukraine, we have to help them, us as well. It's a war that is fought on military field, also economic field, and we have to give all the help that we can give to Ukraine, military, economic, and especially also humanitarian help. The second stage, I would say, is, and I'm sad that the White House took back the words that Biden said in Poland, that for God's sake, this man cannot stay in power. If you look at the atrocities committed right now, I think it's not about actively pursuing a regime change, but it's stating a fact. I think nobody in this room thinks that Putin can stay in power after what's been done. And the long term, I would say there are two parts in it. The first of them is de-Putinization, and it's in parallel or denazification. And we could even call it denazification because, let's be honest, Russia is a Nazi, fascist country at the moment that is aggressive towards all its neighbors. And this is a long-standing process, and it has to go, not only, Putin is not the only one, you know, it goes from the president to the single soldier that is committing those war crimes. And the second part of a long-term thing that we have to be ready for is to help Ukraine rebuild. And I believe that it's quite obvious that the 300 billion of frozen Russian central bank assets should be part of it. But we have to be there together because, once again, repeating, Ukraine is fighting and Ukrainians are dying actually at the moment for all of us. And until the three stages are over, I think it's important also to realize that not only should there be no business as usual, I think there should be no business at all. Now, the next question, and coming a little bit already closer to the subject in hand, is that many people have asked me, has the United Nations failed? I would say the answer to this question is, depends on what you define as a role of United Nations and what is a failure. In some sense, we can say, yes, it has failed. It has failed preventing the war. It has failed in stopping the war. But at the same time, when you think about 1945, how and why United Nations was created, it was created with the same purpose as after the First World War, the League of Nations was created. And the main purpose of those organizations was never again. The League of Nations failed in 20 years when Germany and Soviet Union attacked Poland and the Soviets also attacked Finland. Our country disappeared for 50 years as a consequence of that. So in this sense, so far, even though we have not been able to prevent the war, even though we have not been able to end the crisis in the world that the Security Council is dealing every day, then with the most important task, even though I can say just, only just, but we have been still successful for 77 years. Then again, one of the reasons for the failure of the United Nations and the Security Council is, that has been also mentioned here today, is that the composition of the Security Council and the composition of how the United Nations works, it reflects the world 77 years ago. And with countries or with security, permanent members of Security Council having a veto right is a problem. And if one of the permanent members becomes an aggressive fascist country, then of course the structure of Security Council cannot prevent this. At the same time, we should not be dreamers. We should understand the reality of the situation, and I think it's quite obvious that their structure of the Security Council will not change. We have been talking about Security Council reform forever, you know, and I can just tell you, it will not happen. As long as there are permanent members of the veto right who are not interested in it. And why should they be? Because they have the veto right. And just as a strange example of what I'm talking about, you know, it's my second time being at the United Nations, and the first one was 98 to 2000. And Estonia was at the time when there was just a beginning a little bit of the Security Council reform. We were talking about it, but it was not such a big deal yet. And there was a small group of countries that was called G10. And Estonia was there, our good colleagues from the Security Council, Ireland was there, and so on. And when I arrived in 1998, then we were members of this group, and I joined the first meeting, and people were talking this UNE's language of let's not lose the momentum, because the 55th anniversary of the United Nations is approaching. And then 15 years later, in 2015, I returned to New York, and Estonia now is a member of what is called the ACT group, Accountability, Coherence, Transparency. And one of the tasks of this group is Security Council reform. And so my very first meeting in this ACT group in town altogether was a meeting of this ACT group. And when I entered the room and I'm listening, the first thing I hear is that the 70th anniversary of United Nations is approaching. Let's not lose the momentum. So my first intervention in New York was thanking everybody for doing such a great job, because in the 15 years that I was absent, they have not lost the momentum. But in more serious side, you know, when we look at the fact that United Nations was created and how United Nations was created, then it was after just a crazy cataclysm in the world. And so when we talk about Security Council reform, then it might be possible if we would have another cataclysm. Let's hope that we can avoid it. And let's hope that the main task of the United Nations of never again can be preserved. But it cannot be preserved by itself. There is a lot of work that has to be put in it. And there are 193 countries who all must work with it. Now coming to the main subject that I was supposed to be talking about the experience in the Security Council and looking forward, then, you know, the question that I hear now quite often, I have given numerous interviews after coming out of the council, was it worth it? And, you know, before we entered the council, there was quite a strong debate in Estonia about exactly this issue. Is it worth it? The resources, the manpower, everything that you put in it, what can you gain? The debate itself, I think, is very, very legitimate. And we saw the same happening in Sweden even, who had been in the council for many times. But for us, there were two problems in this debate that made it difficult to have, at the beginning of the campaign, to have a really efficient and effective campaign. The first one was that, let's be honest, when we were debating, we had no idea that what we were talking about, because it's the first time that Estonia went to the council. And so a lot of the questions asked at the time, now after the experience being in the council, when I look back, they were all wrong premises, you know, on the other side, who were skeptics. One of them, for example, was that the elected members have no say in the work of the council anyway, because the permanent members are deciding everything and so on. This turned out to be completely wrong. I can say from my experience, I would say 99% of the time we were working as 15, not 5 plus 10. The other argument was that we will be pushed in taking a stand in issues that would be uncomfortable for us, geopolitically, sometimes maybe going against our good allies and friends, and it would be better for a small country to stay out of it. That also, I would say, with very few exceptions, and I think Richard mentioned this Iran issue when we were talking about JCPOA, I would say this was the only time when it was really difficult, when there was a principal contradiction between the Europeans and United States. But after the change of administration in Washington, after the elections, actually even this was taken as a positive thing for Estonia that we did. Because the other thing where this discrepancy between Europe and United States is there, is accepted to be on different sides or different positions, and this is Middle East. And so when Estonia was working with the Europeans, this was not held against us. You know, everybody was used to that already. And the second problem with the campaign and the debate was that the debate in Estonia started at a moment when it was after the point of no return, because Estonia put the candidature in already 2005, and there was a long period of quiet work, you know, and exchange of votes and so on, but there is not really a campaign, and there was always a possibility to pull the plug when we feel that the debate will end saying that it's not worthwhile. But when the government already decided to allocate some money, like a third of what we were asking for, but then the debate started. And so there is no way back, and so that made it a little bit difficult. But we managed to get over it pretty fast. And now the main theme of the meeting today, small states in Security Council, I would say that, first of all, with my experience in the Council, I think we are no different from bigger states. The role that we played, the possibilities that we had, like the first year, for example, we were there together with Germany, and I don't see that there was a big difference between the possibilities what Germany had and what they were doing and what we were doing. So basically, it's more of a question of elected members. And in this sense, yes, there is one advantage that small states might have, and it is that, by definition, there are very few conflicts where we are directly involved or have direct interests. And so therefore, quite often, the conflicting sides look at us with more trust, and they believe that we are honest brokers, and we do not have our own interests in the game. That said, there is, of course, one interest for countries like Estonia, for small states, and this is our values, human rights, international law. These are the things that we can't break. Now the positive things, you know, differently from the claim of the skeptics that we might create tensions between us and our good allies, the opposite happened. I think our relations with our allies, and I mean mainly the permanent members, United States, United Kingdom, France, they got better. We had good relations before, but the kind of interaction that we had, both in the capitals and also here in Tallinn and also in New York, they were unprecedented. You know, the kind of close cooperation that we had, it grew. The other part of it, the world became bigger for us, because apart from strengthening the ties with our good allies, we managed to get new relationships, both with the campaign and also with the membership. And third, the positive thing, we managed to get our own subjects, so to say, on the table. That means that it has been mentioned here today so many times, cybersecurity, but also our priorities, like the issues of our region, Belarus, Ukraine. And if you look at the whole history of the war, 8-year-old war in Ukraine, then I have to say, even though it's maybe not the word to use, but we have been lucky with the East European Group membership in the Security Council at the time of all of those 4 years, because the East European Group, where we were elected from, is a very complicated group. You also have Belarus and Azerbaijan, all kinds of countries. But 2014, when it started, it was Lithuania, then it was Ukraine itself, then it was Poland, then it was Estonia. And I'm very glad, looking at what my good friend Ferit, who was also present here today, the ambassador of Albania, who took over the penholdership on Afghanistan, on Ukraine, the work he's doing. I think we have been able to keep it on the table. But then I could add also issues like international law, accountability, women, peace and security. And the interesting thing also is that before we entered, because it was the first time, we didn't realize what does it mean to have priorities, because every country entering the Security Council, they have a list of their priorities, what they are going to do. And the thinking at the time was that we can show our priorities through having special events like informal meetings and so on. But it turns out, yes, that's also true. But the most important thing is you can use it every day in every single conflict, in every single intervention. You can talk about the rights of women. You can also talk about international law. You can talk about accountability, and looking how closely, especially the countries party to conflicts, were looking at what we were saying. I think it worked. I think everybody was looking closely, and they did realize that we had a very clear agenda according to our membership, on our priorities as being the members. Now the question also on the possibilities of elected members, small members, but all elected members, is what can you achieve, what can you do? And I've been telling the successors, Albania and Switzerland is asking our experience and so on. I've been telling all of them that it depends on you, yourself. Because I'm telling them to be ambitious, because that's for a small country like Estonia, at least, it's a generational project. It's the other 30 years that we have to wait for the next time. So why go there and just sit? Let's try to be as ambitious as we can, but let's be cautiously ambitious. That once we feel confident enough that we can manage, we can really, our feet are touching the ground already, then let's grab more. And let's play on the line and just grab a little bit more, but still that we can feel. And that's what Estonia did. In June of 2020, the first year we were in the council, we had this feeling already. And when Germany and Indonesia left, Afghanistan was left. The penholdership for Afghanistan was left open, and we worked closely with all other members in order to grab the pen together with Norway. Then we took the pen with France on the European Union mission for arms embargo. Monitoring the arms embargo in Libya, called Irini, and that was noticed, and that's possible for small countries to be more visible, to do more. And so there are two kinds of things that are really important. First of all, ambition, and secondly, you have to be ready for pressure. That there will be pressure from bigger countries, especially you have to be ready at the very beginning to say that you will not get replies in the capital. Because first the big ones will come to the foreign ministry and try to push you to some decision, and when the response comes from there, then you can forget the authority of your ambassador in New York. So basically this will continue, and even if you are influenced by this pressure, please tell them that the ambassador in New York will give the answer. But again, this kind of pressure that we saw, only Iran and JCPOA were the moment, and once also a little bit about Middle East during the Trump administration times. But otherwise, I think it's not that bad. We had an excellent group of elected members also. That's also important, also to understand that there is a constant change in composition of elected members. And when we look at the first year and second year, I have to say the first year was kind of easier. And the dynamics is changing all the time. And of course, it's a kind of a gut feeling issue, but you can also look at the votes. In order for a resolution to pass, you need 9 votes out of 15 when nobody of the permanent members will exercise their veto right. I would say that in the first year, we had 8 votes guaranteed, and so there was work just to get one more with outreach. I think in the second year, I might say it was probably 7, so we had more to work on. And especially, I was a bit disappointed on some of the countries on issues like Belarus and Ukraine. And when some of them are taking as granted that us Europeans, we have to understand every detail of their problems on their continent, I expect also them to make at least a little bit of an effort to understand what's happening around us. What, of course, I would say was the most important thing for having a successful campaign and then having a successful membership in the council was the fantastic team that we had. I have been doing this job for more than 30 years, and I have to say I've never seen this motivated, this well-equipped, this good team, both in New York and also in Tallinn, and the cooperation that we had. I have to say it was just amazing. And that brings me to the last point, and that is part of what I was supposed to say about it's looking ahead. And I would say 3 different things. The first thing is, before going to the council, and I was meeting with some of my colleagues who had been there, also smaller countries and so on, we tripled the size of the mission for the job in the council. And these people, after the membership, they left. And especially difficult, they leave in the middle of the winter, and usually the rotation happens in the summer. And even though one of the arguments on the positive side of why go to the council is that the foreign service gets such a great experience, and the people working will be so experienced after that. Then most of my colleagues who had been there, I will not name them, but they said that they were very sad that actually this experience was wasted, that these people were scattered around to just haphazard places. And I took as an obligation to myself, and I saw this as a win-win, both for the Ministry and Foreign Service, but also for those people, to find the best possible places for them in order to use this experience. And the experience doesn't only have to do with specific issues like Africa or Middle East, whatever. It's the experience of very intensive work, of communication skills, responsibility, teamwork. And these are all kinds of things where I think we have been mostly quite successful. I think we've managed to really use this experience because the next generation of diplomats will, like I said, have to wait for 30 years. The second thing on looking ahead is that when we had the priorities in the council, then the question is how to continue with the same priorities when you don't have the means of the council anymore. And in a way, I would say it's not a very difficult task because the priorities do not come out of the blue. The priorities are Estonian national interests. And so therefore, these priorities will remain. And the United Nations has so many different fields, so many different places where you can have interventions, where you can have resolutions, also in the General Assembly and the committee work and so on. And it's just obvious that we are continuing with that, women, children, accountability, international law. These are all the issues, cybersecurity, that will continue to be our priorities. We are just more experienced than we were before. And finally, we put in the candidature. We talk about the future. It's a very far future. We have already put in the candidature for 2050. And like I said, one generation of diplomats, but it was not haphazard, it was a calculated choice because we didn't have experience before, but when we look at other countries, like Germany is trying to be there every 7 years. Ireland, we heard also today, is trying to be there every 20 years. And then looking at the size of Estonia, I think we were thinking that 30 years might be just good for a country of our size. When we put in the candidature and just among some friends, we were first, it sounded like a joke. We were saying, let's hope that in 2050, that the place will still be waiting for us. With what's happening in the world right now, it doesn't sound like a joke anymore. It's something that we all have to work together in order to make sure that United Nations, its charter, its principles, and also the seat in the Security Council will be there in 2050. And with toil and sweat from our side, we will prevail. Thank you. I forgot that I was asked to tell you all that this is the end of the official part of this conference, but there is some wine waiting for you in the lobby. Thank you.